Jesus here in the midst of people who were trying to catch him out. This invitation wasn't because they genuinely wanted to be with Jesus. We're told in the very first verse that they were watching him carefully. Have you ever had that feeling that someone is watching you carefully? You might be at the gym and somebody is watching you and they're thinking, he's got skinny arms. And you're watching them and you're knowing what they're thinking about you. As the Pharisees are watching Jesus, he is watching someone else. In verse 2, it says, right in front of Jesus was a man suffering from dropsy. Now, this is a term for what we call today edema. It's the swelling of the body from taking on fluid for whatever reason. It can be painful and difficult to deal with. And so here is this man probably planted in the room by the Pharisees to see what Jesus would do. And noticing the man, he then goes on to ask a question of those who are experts in the law. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, we don't know with certainty whether this man with dropsy was strategically placed in the home as a way of tempting Jesus to heal on the Sabbath. If it was deliberate, it was not only silly, but it was also wicked. They already knew from past experience with Jesus what he was capable of doing whenever a similar occasion presented itself. He keeps running into this subject of healing on the Sabbath. It's something that the rulers can't accept. But notice their response. They remain silent. Originally, the Sabbath was simply a day of rest. It was a day to take a break from regular work, but not from doing good. But the Jewish leaders had added in all of these other amendments, which made it so confusing, and it gave excuse for division. There are practical things that still need to be maintained. For example, you wouldn't wait until the Sabbath was over if someone needed CPR. We still continue to do the essentials, and we never stop from doing good. Traditions can also be something that we become passionate about maintaining. Some of us may have come from church backgrounds where tradition plays a huge part in what we do and how we worship. One of the reasons that we continue to do the things that we do is because we've always done it that way. But when we elevate tradition to a place that's equal to God's word, we have a problem. We will defend our right to do these things because of tradition. Jesus is asking the question here to get the Pharisees thinking. Why do you believe the way that you do? Now, this is an important question because tradition can stop us in our tracks, and it can stop us from moving forward with God because this new thing doesn't match with our expectation. How many times have you heard of someone visiting another church with family or friends, and they come back with all of the criticisms of everything that wasn't done properly? It wasn't a real church because there was no pipe organ. There was no stained glass windows. The pulpit wasn't in the centre, and the cross was missing. And so at the end of chapter 13 in Luke's Gospel, we reach this halfway point of Luke's travel narrative. And in the second half, Jesus identifies more openly about the beneficiaries of the kingdom of God. And he has some strong words of warning, especially to those who think that they're in the kingdom of God. There will be unexpected reversals. Those who exalt themselves will be brought low, while the humble will be raised up. The first will be last, and the last first. The tempo of the teaching is beginning to be raised. There is an urgency in making a decision. The time is short. You must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. This meal takes place in the home of a synagogue ruler. Jesus anticipated the hostile, unspoken thoughts asked by the lawyers and Pharisees. It was a pointed question, because healing on the Sabbath, unless it was a life-threatening situation, was not lawful. So little wonder that the observers were silent. The Pharisees had become so obsessed with rules and traditions that they had forgotten to care about people, those in need. Legalism elevates itself over people, but God elevates people over rules. So if you're keeping a rule and it elevates itself above compassion, it's time to rethink the rule. There has to be a balance. And Jesus shows us this perfectly in verse 4. He takes hold of the man, he heals him, and he sends him on his way. The Pharisees remain silent. How could they argue any points of doctrine when the miracle takes place right in front of their own eyes? If this man continues to stand there suffering, the rulers are going to look like fools with no compassion. Many times we do the same thing. We stand around arguing points of doctrine while God is wanting to do great things through us. Once this man is healed, Jesus then continues the conversation. Verse 5 says, "If one of you has a son or an ox and falls into a well on the Sabbath, will you not pull him out immediately?" Imagine, fathers, if you're on a camping trip with your son and he falls down a small cliff face. What would you think his response would be if you said, "Sorry, son, you'll have to wait until it's dark, until the Sabbath's over, until I can get you out"? I'm sure that would go down very nicely in a lot of families. No father in his right mind would do that to their own child, not even an animal. This man with dropsy needs to help on the Sabbath, and Jesus is not going to ignore him and let him continue to suffer. So we should never tire of doing the right thing, even when we ourselves are feeling tired. When the master of the house has risen, the door will be shut, and there will be those left on the outside. They'll knock on the door, but they won't be permitted to enter because they're not known. After the healing and the questioning, the response is the same. In verse 6, it says, "They had nothing to say." Jesus was right. How could they argue? And then in verse 7, he tells them a parable when he noticed the guests trying to pick the best places of honour at the table. I remember a time when 8 of us here from Christlife Church went over to Samoa to help with the tsunami rebuilding mission program. It was back in 2009, and Jason Gilmore and I were working on this pastor's house. Obviously, the tsunami had taken the village out down at the beach, and we were rebuilding the village up in the hills. And we were in this pastor's house, and we had finished this front room, and we were working on one of the side rooms. And at this time, there was a presbytery meeting being held from the Congregational Church of Samoa in this house. And it was lunchtime, and we were invited to join all of these representatives from right across this region for lunch. And so we quickly washed our hands, and we sat down outside the circle. And for those of you who know Samoa, you know what the humidity and the heat is like, so we were not looking and smelling all that good. And we sat down, and all of a sudden, a person up the other side of the circle motioned for us to come up. And each person was sitting cross-legged in a circle, and a plate of food had been put in front of each person. So we had to pick up our plates of food, and we went right round to the other side of the circle, and this man motioned for Jason and I to sit on either side of him. We did not realise, we found out later, he was the chief of this entire region, and he's all dressed in this Samoan regalia. We're sitting there in our yellow high-vis tradies vests, just smelling and looking like the north end of a southbound camel, honestly. And here we were, we had the best seats in the house. We had this honoured position. It was one of the most humbling experiences of that entire trip. From verse 8 through to verse 14, Jesus tells them that trying to sit closest to the host and trying to be seen as a VIP and getting the best spot is nothing more than self-promotion. Proverbs chapter 25 and verses 6 and 7 says, "Do not exalt yourselves in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among great men. It is better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than for him to humiliate you in front of a nobleman." Imagine going from first class to no class. We all like to be recognised, to be seen with the right people, in the best places. Selfies with friends at the beach, or a family photograph at a lavish resort. That's the way that we want people to see us. An attitude of self-promotion, where we're trying to influence the minds of other people by displaying something that's not real. It's obsessive and consuming. God dislikes pride and arrogance. We're so concerned with what others think of us that many times we lose sight of what God thinks of us. We're living our lives trying to impress others. Jesus is saying that our life is to be one of humility, where we are willing to take the lowest spot. Putting ourselves down negatively can also be a self-obsession. Humility is not thinking about ourselves. It's thinking about other people rather than ourselves. When we draw close to God, we begin to love the things that God loves. And God loves lost people. Our human heart wants to be liked, appreciated, and honoured by others. And this is in the context of seeking to move ourselves up to a higher place by being seen with people of a higher standing. If it's done for the purpose of repayment, it's not done with the right heart or attitude. Instead of trying to get people's attention in this life, we should be trying to get God's attention. Rather than promoting ourselves in this life, we should be patiently waiting for the day that He will promote us in His kingdom. In the same way that guests today have place cards at a formal dinner party or a wedding or a reception, there were protocols in the ancient world of Roman and Greek culture. People would attempt to reposition their seating so that they could be seen with the right people. Jesus commented on this at the dinner that he was attending. He took the opportunity to tell a parable. Beware, he warned in verses 8 and 9, of taking the more prestigious position, only to find yourself relocated to a lower position by the host. Verse 10 says, take the lower position and wait to be invited to the higher position. Jesus says, there you will receive greater honour. And then he gives instructions to the host. Have a look at verse 12. When you give a dinner, don't invite the rich, invite the poor, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid in the resurrection of the just. Now, this would have been just a conversation stopper. Here they were, just about ready to eat their next mouthful of food, when Jesus reminds them of the poor and the hungry. So here they are, just feeding their faces, and all of a sudden Jesus said, now don't forget about the poor and the hungry. I'm sure they would have almost choked. You've heard of putting the wrong word in at the wrong time. Well, imagine trying to salvage this situation. After dropping this kind of statement, you'd have to be very good at conflict resolution. But for Jesus, it was the right word at the right time. And then we come to the last section that we're looking today in verses 15, when the Messiah will return and there will be this great feast. And he says, blessed are those who are invited to the feast. Jesus began to tell all those present of the invitation for them to join him in this great banquet. This applied to the Jews in the original context, but there are truths in this parable that apply to everyone who refuses to hear the gospel, to not acknowledge what Jesus has done on the cross, and to treat it of little importance will have serious consequences. In Jesus' day, 2 invitations were sent out to potential guests prior to the upcoming celebration. The first was sent out a number of weeks before. The second invitation was then sent out 24 hours before the event. The hostess would stock up on all of the supplies but had no way of keeping everything refrigerated. The first invitation was so that the guests knew that they had to prepare. The final invitation confirmed the exact hour. Those to whom Jesus was speaking could have easily decoded his message. The prophets of the Old Testament had issued the first invitation to Israel. God had invited the family of Abraham to the wedding feast, and then he told them how they could all be part of it. But the parable takes an unexpected turn with the sending out of the second invitation and the words, "Come, for everything is now ready." It's decision time, but they all begin to make excuses. The first had bought an investment property. The second had bought 5 new cars. And the third was on his honeymoon. At first, all of the excuses seem plausible. But looking at the reasoning, it makes no sense at all. The first guest excused himself on the basis of a land purchase. Now, as it is today, it would be very unlikely that someone would enter into a contract to purchase land without seeing it first and knowing every detail about it. The language used here doesn't indicate a hasty, unscheduled settlement. The second excuse was even more blatantly false. People who bought oxen in those days always tested them in a field before they negotiated the sale. Can you imagine a man phoning his wife saying, "Listen, I'm going to be late for dinner because I've just paid for 5 cars that I haven't seen or let alone driven"? And this is the nature of the excuse of this second guest. The third excuse seems the most reasonable, yet in fact it was the most rudest. Major events such as weddings and banquets, they were never allowed to conflict. Everyone would have known well in advance about both of these events, and they would have been scheduled accordingly. And then there was another element that made this excuse so fabricated. In the Middle East, it was the height of rudeness to speak on formal occasions about intimate relations between men and women. As Jesus spoke, his audience would have been hanging on every word. They knew to whom he was referring. People who make excuses to God in any age, the trivial excuses of business, career, or adventure, they know how easy it is to be tempted and attracted by these things. This parable is very close to our heart. To ignore such an invitation is madness. One day the great door to eternity will close, never to open again. Are we ignoring this invitation, or are we embracing it? Becoming a Christian may seem like an easy, simple step, but there is a cost, and often there is pain. Being a follower involves sacrifice. It involves the total surrender of our lives to Him as Lord. We have to be willing to be taught by Jesus, to sit under the authority of His word. He alone has the right to determine how we live and the decisions that we make about money, marriage, study, work, and our involvement in ministry. When we become complacent about our faith, we become excluded from Christ's presence. We begin to make excuses or bargain or do deals with God. Jesus urges us, don't be satisfied with someone else's faith. Find your own faith. Don't be satisfied with someone else's obedience. Follow truth for yourself. Don't be satisfied with someone else's testimony. Discover and live out your own story. Jesus is the great shepherd, and we need to be shepherds following after His leading. Act now. Make our own decision about where we want to spend eternity. Jesus uses strong words here to describe God's judgment. Later on, we read, as Jesus entered Jerusalem, He wept over the city. This indicates His heartfelt cry for His people, the ones who were refusing to listen. This is their chance, and He doesn't want them to miss out. One day, God will close the door against people, and He will do so with tears in His eyes and grief in His heart. Men and women do not perish because of God. It's God's purpose that none will perish, and He wants to give us life. But we have to make a decision, one that is urgent, vital, and personal. The invitation has gone out to all. It will be of our choosing where we spend eternity. We choose by an act of our will. Many consider that the invitation is of little importance. Jesus wept for the lost, but He also acted. He took our plight seriously and sacrificed His life for us. What sacrifices are we willing to make for that our friends and our family might come to know Him? Do we speak with courage? And do we warn those who are lost? In verses 21 to 23, the servant comes back and he reports everything to the master. The owner of the house becomes angry. And so he goes out and he says, listen, invite all those from the streets, those who are lost and poor. Jesus told stories with extraordinary skill. It was one of the many ways that He did the unexpected. Jesus was throwing down a challenge to the Jewish people who considered themselves to be religious, like the smug dinner guests. The Pharisees and scribes were always discussing among themselves their holy order and the decree and the honour that they claimed to hold, as each one fought for the highest place at the table. All those who see themselves as superior to others and refuse to demonstrate great modesty will be brought into disgrace as they are reduced to the lowest place. God is an enemy of all who desire to exalt themselves. Modesty and humbleness are the places that he wants us to take. To extend charity with no desire for gain or ambition is better than bargaining for mutual compensation. We are to bless others liberally without expectation of earthly reward. Who then will be included? Jesus tells us that it'll be the social outcasts of Israel, the lame and the poor of the city. Also included will be those from the highways and the byways, people from the Gentile world. Jesus is declaring that after his death and resurrection, people from all nations and races will be able to follow him. The underlying principle of Jesus' words continue to challenge us today. Galatians 6:10 says, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers." Imagine for a moment if I announced to you that in a month's time I was going to die. And I stood before you this morning, and my last request to you as God's people would be, could you look after my wife and family? So let's say my son moves back from the Sunshine Coast, my daughter comes up from Maitland, and my family are all here at Christlife, and I'm asking you to take care of my family. How do you think it would be if you looked around 12 months later and you noticed that nobody was taking care of my family? You would feel awkward. Maybe you might even feel guilty. How do you think it will be when Jesus returns and he finds out that we haven't looked after his family? Jesus loves his family in the same way that we love our family. We need to be good, faithful shepherds in our community and always be looking out for lost sheep. We may not claim Jewish heritage, but we may have participated in Christian ceremonies, in baptisms, confirmation, church weddings. We may have heard the essentials of Christianity. We may have even made a profession of faith, but life has become too busy to have any time for God. There are deals to be done, holidays to be enjoyed, pleasures to pursue, all without any reference to God. And in the end, they're just weak excuses. No wonder Jesus said the host was angry. If we prepared a dinner party and the guests sent weak apologies at the last minute, we'd be furious. It's naive to think that God is not angry with us when we find excuses for not putting him first in our lives. It cost God a great deal to make this banquet possible. There is also a warning from Jesus because he's the joint host of this banquet. Jesus, the servant, is now sending out the second invitation, and he's inviting us to attend the table which God has promised. If you've been invited, don't make excuse, even at this last and at this late hour. If you're wandering around lost, there is still room. In verse 22, it says, there is still room. And then in verse 23, it says, I desire that my house will be full. He's inviting everyone, but to those with excuse, they will not get to enjoy everything that he has prepared. For those who don't want to be found, God's not forcing anyone to attend. But to those who will cry out and ask for forgiveness, the door will be open and the table will be full. Beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So let's get our invitation cards ready and begin to invite all those that we know to the feast that God has prepared. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word to us today. Help us to gain a heart of understanding and help us to apply these things to our lives. Help us to feed our hearts on these truths, to equip us to be the people that you've called us to be. Thank you for the insight and the ability you give us to comprehend the words that have been written and to acknowledge the importance of the invitation that you place before us today. The opportunity to have our sins forgiven, our burdens to be placed upon the cross, to be invited in, and to be part of your family. Keep us focused on you, looking to you and waiting in anticipation for that great banquet that you have invited us to, learning and growing and being transformed into your image. For we ask all these things this morning in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.